Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating question. What happens when a scientific theory that's been around forever suddenly comes up against a mountain of new evidence? And this isn't just about charts and data. It's about how deeply rooted ideas, even in the world of science, can be incredibly resistant to change. We're going to look at a major debate in ancient history to see exactly how this all plays out.
So, let's start with that big question. Why do some scientific ideas hang on for so long, even when new discoveries seem to completely contradict them? We're going to explore this whole puzzle through one specific and pretty controversial historical framework, the 1500 BCE model of ancient Indian history. All right, let's get into the model itself. For, more than a century, a really dominant theory about ancient India has revolved around the year 1500 BCE. This is the idea often tied to an Aryan invasion or maybe a migration. But as you're about to see, the reasons people have defended it so fiercely go way beyond just the scientific facts.
And here's the absolute core of the argument, right from our source material. The intense defense of this old model isn't really about scientific evidence anymore. Nope. Its survival is actually rooted in ideology.
So if it's not built on a solid foundation of data, what's holding it up? Well, the source argues that the 1500 BCE model is propped up by three really distinct ideological pillars that have supported it for generations.
So here they are, the three pillars. First, the model was really useful for colonial agendas because it suggested that foreign rule was just a normal part of India's history. Second, it helped create racial hierarchies by linking language to race, which we now know is incorrect. And third, it lined up with some specific theological goals. These weren't afterthoughts, they were kind of baked in from the beginning.
And that first point is just so important. Think about it. If you frame Indian civilization as being founded by outsiders, well, then the model created a story that made colonial rules seem like just another chapter in a long history of civilizing missions from foreigners.
And make no mistake, this isn't just dusty old history. The source makes it clear that these ideas have had really lasting consequences. They helped fuel social divisions like the so-called Aryan-Dravidian divide, and they've continued to influence identity politics in the region long after the colonial period ended.
Okay, so besides these historical pillars, the defense of the model also leans heavily on language. It's fascinating, really. The very words people use to talk about the debate can shape how we see it, and can even become a tool to push back against new ideas.
Just look at the language here. If you call the defense of the old model protective, it sounds pretty good, right? Like scientists are just being careful and responsible. But our source suggests a much more critical term, paradigm-preserving bias, which paints a totally different picture, one of an active, maybe even systematic resistance to any challenging information.
So, to be super clear, what exactly is paradigm-preserving bias? Well, according to the source, it's not about an open-minded search for the truth. It's about defending the model that's already in place, even when a flood of new evidence is pointing in a completely different direction.
And this isn't just an abstract idea. This bias shows up in very real ways. Things like cherry-picking the data that fits your model while ignoring the rest, dismissing scholars who disagree with you, using super technical jargon to keep other people out of the conversation, and even using the peer review system as a shield to block new ideas.
But here's the thing, an ideological defense, no matter how strong, can only hold out for so long. And now we get to the real core of the challenge, the massive, overwhelming weight of new evidence from all kinds of scientific fields that's making that old model really hard to defend. First up, let's get our hands dirty and look at the archaeology. We've got a whole stream of new discoveries literally coming out of the ground that directly challenge that 1500 BCE timeline.
I mean, new discoveries at sites like Birana and Rakhigarhi are pushing the timeline for civilization in this region back by thousands of years. And what's really crucial is that these digs show zero signs of a big invasion or a sudden cultural takeover. Instead, all the evidence points to a story of local, continuous, indigenous development.
Okay, next we turn to the incredibly powerful field of archaeogenetics. This is where scientists can analyze ancient DNA to piece together the history of entire populations.
And guess what? The genetic data tells a very similar story. When scientists looked at ancient DNA from the Harappan civilization, they just didn't find evidence of a huge wave of new people coming in from the Central Asian steppe around 1500 BCE. Instead, the key genetic markers suggest really deep ancient roots, right there in the subcontinent itself.
And for our final line of evidence, we're going to look up to the stars.
This is the field of archaeoastronomy, basically analyzing how ancient people observed the cosmos.
This is so cool. By analyzing astronomical references in ancient Vedic texts, things like descriptions of the solstices, scholars can argue that these texts are describing the sky as it looked thousands of years before 1500 BCE. This suggests that the culture that wrote these texts is way, way older than the traditional model ever allowed for.
So what happens when you take these three powerful streams of evidence, archaeology, genetics, and archaeoastronomy, and you put them all together? Well, what you get is a massive collision, a direct confrontation between an old ideological model and a very, very different empirical reality.
And the key word here is convergence. It's not just one finding from one field. It's the fact that multiple, totally independent lines of evidence are all pointing in the exact same direction. Together, they tell a story that, according to the source, makes the old 1500 BCE model pretty much impossible to hold on to based on the evidence.
What we're seeing here is really a textbook example of scientific change. You have an old model, often propped up by ideology, then an overwhelming amount of new evidence comes along, and eventually the old model just can't stand anymore, forcing a fundamental change in how we understand things, which you'd call a paradigm shift.
And this all brings us to one final, really big question. Does this whole story show science failing by holding on to a flawed idea for too long? Or does it actually show the ultimate success of science's built-in, self-correcting mechanism, proving that in the end, even the most entrenched ideas have to give way to evidence? It's a powerful reminder of how science, slowly but surely, moves forward. Thanks for joining.